Welcome to the Veritaseum DAO channel. We are excited to be back again. We're here for an exciting discussion panel, and today we have Greg Lang joining us. He's the founder of Rivet. Greg, thanks for joining us.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, and Jeff, knock us out with what's going on today.
Good morning, Lisa. Good morning, Greg. Thanks
Good
for being
morning.
here. Reggie, I just wanted to, this is Reggie, of course, everybody knows Reggie at this point, but the founder of Veritaseum. But the main thing we wanted to start off with today, that Reggie has been talking with the VeriDAO about an interesting paper that Veritaseum has produced about Block. So let's just start off with Reggie. Why don't you tell us a little bit about Block and what led to the creation of this paper?
Well, quick history. From about 2007 on, the team at Veritaseum, the research team, has specialized in doing what we call forensic analysis papers and research. So basically using our strength, so my personal strength, which is fundamental analysis, global macroeconomic analysis, and penchant for technology, to analyze companies who are either extremely undervalued or extremely overvalued, or have a story to tell that is not prevalent in the mainstream media or the relevant business rags such as Barron's, Wall Street Journal, etc. And also were either not followed by sell-side analysts or mispriced by sell-side analysts. So it's a long-winded way of saying I'm trying to give you a different spin on things. Now, that spin usually works in the favor of a position that we may have, because we're not a news outlet. We're either an investment outlet or we have our own operations. And so an example of what we've done in the past, we had bearish reports on Bear Stearns, Lehman Brothers, General Growth Properties, many banks, many insurers during the 2007, 2008 era that collapsed, as well as real estate companies, etc. We were bullish on Google after Android, bearish on RIM, which is a company that made BlackBerry, etc. Fast forward now to the present, and to answer your question, we're very, very bullish on the distributed ledger technology space, and we are very bullish on the intellectual property that underpins this, that has been captured through patents, trademarks, copyrights, etc. We are also very bearish on those entities who we feel did not do ample due diligence, or who've been collecting rents on these properties without actually having legal title or claim to the properties. So I don't know why I'm so long-winded. I'm short on sleep because your question wasn't that complicated. So that was the reason why we did the report on Block. Block, I just saw on CNBC today, they had Jack Dorsey did the first investment conference in 5 years, since 2017, basically saying they're betting, the farm on Bitcoin and Bitcoin technologies. And the layer 2 that is prevalent in Bitcoin payments, the Lightning Network, we feel has significant overlap over a patent that we filed back in 2014.
Interesting. Okay. Well, thank you for that, Reggie. Looking at the paper, I noticed there was a lot of mention about the fintech industry, and a lot of focus on that. Can you explain how, how that fits in with not just the Block and the patent, but also frame out how is that the vast majority of the market share that we're talking about, or is what was the purpose of framing out or elaborating on the fintech in the paper as well?
So when we do the reports, we do it with the assumption that the reader is not well versed in the industry that you're reading. The reports are not designed for blockchain payment specialists or experts. It's designed for the casual reader, the casual reader with a vocabulary or pinch to understand and look things up. But most people are not well versed in the fintech industry, and or Block in particular. So we try to give you a background and look into the universe of the particular company at hand, the industry, sub-industry sector, and then we go into the company in particular. So that's why there is a a decent amount of information on the fintech space. Now, looking at Jack Dorsey, who's the CEO of Block, looking at his and his CFO's comments, they don't want to be judged as a payment company or a pure play payment company. They want to be judged as an ecosystem company or a platform, which is interesting because they're looking to expand. And I could see where they have acquisitions such as the streaming company Tidal, which I think they bought from Jay-Z, and they are delving heavily into Bitcoin. They have their own development flavor of the Lightning Network, so they are diversifying. Um, I can guess what direction they're going into, but the only way to know for sure is to either be inside their head or wait and see.
Definitely. One of the things I noticed was on, I think it was page 42, the report stated that there's been close to zero due diligence regarding intellectual property risks and liabilities within crypto, blockchain, and distributed ledger tech space. How would you improve this, and what does that look like if there's improvements made in the due diligence in IP in the crypto space?
Well,
what could they do to improve that?
Let me give a quick background of how I see things, because a lot of the investors that go into these companies from a private equity or venture capital perspective, most of them are not newbies. They're usually relatively well capitalized, rather well experienced, and even if those who aren't experienced, they still have a decent amount of intellectual capital at hand to suss things out. So when you have an investor and they decide to go into the semiconductor space, you put money into a semiconductor fab. You don't simply assume that the company who's building the chips, the chip design, you don't assume that they own everything that they're building. You do due diligence. Are they familiar with the processes? Do they own the actual IP behind the processes? Have they patented the processes to protect it? Same thing in biopharmaceutical or any technology. And it's not just technology. You could go outside the basic industrial manufacturing services, etc. But technology in particular is extremely IP intensive by definition. So looking at semiconductors, looking at biopharmaceuticals, looking at any technology company you could think of, a technology industry, there's always an IP due diligence and IP check. The DLT industry is about as intense in the technological prowess area as possible, and yet I can't think of, I don't see any evidence of any real intellectual property due diligence. One of the reasons is probably, this is a guess, so I'm surmising, that the early entrepreneurs in the space didn't come from a general business background, didn't come from a financial background. They came from the engineering, cypherpunk background, open source, etc., where there's a general anathema towards patents and IP protection. That's my observation. I'm not pointing fingers, but that's my observation. If that's the case, that could be the reason why there hasn't been a lot of attention put into the space. But they started taking on large amounts of professional investor money. Venture capital firms, private equity firms, big banks, etc. And these guys want protected and at least predictable returns on investment. And so they are making demands on intellectual property protections, and you see the industry changing significantly. If you look at all the successful, as in terms of cash flow, companies in the space, they all now are endeavoring to protect their IP. Uniswap, Compound, Aave, etc. You see the licenses that have first from no license to an open source license to a closed source commercial license. That change is not because they're flip flopping or they're being mean or bad. It's because it's very difficult to profit by selling something that someone else can give away for free. And I could go through the chain, but I think we've gone through the story before of Veritaseum, Bancor, Uniswap, SushiSwap, PancakeSwap, etc., where there's consistent forking of the same base code. And then every time it's forked, the user base would move from one project to another project, and the initial projects decide to slowly or quickly close up the commercial license to their code. And that is a normal procession of things. But I think in other industries, that was done up front because it was common practice or common knowledge that if you have something valuable, you need to take ownership of it and protect it. That doesn't mean you can't give it away. As a matter of fact, and I sent a tweet out the other day, if you are pro open source, then you are by definition pro IP protection, because you can't open source or control your open source code if you don't exercise your rights of your IP.
It's a really great point. Absolutely.
Right. An open source license is a license that tells you what you can and cannot do with property that you own.
And I'm sorry, excuse me, Reggie, for interrupting. Greg, I'd love to know your thoughts on companies doing their due diligence and kind of where you see that playing into.
It's something that I think that is an unfortunate challenge that young startups face. One of the things that gave us a huge advantage as a company coming into it initially as Open Relay, and then as Rivet when we pivoted to do more fundamental blockchain infrastructure than order book infrastructure, which was so our first project was Open Relay, which was a 0x order book infrastructure service that we provided to developers who wanted to build front ends off of it. And we just found there was more demand for an RPC service provider like Rivet. And that was how we shifted to there. But when we very first got going, we started thinking about licenses right away. Like we knew we were going to have to make some of these decisions about how the IP needs to be stewarded, not necessarily protected from people who want to copy it, because we, at Rivet, we believe that open source is the right way. So we started immediately to position our licenses to protect things the way we wanted to protect them. And that's something that's often overlooked and often hard to go back and correct once you've got your projects built, because of the way that, and I don't know if getting into the way that libraries are inherited by requirements and build manifests, but once you get a mix of different software licenses into your open source project, you can create a lot of headaches for yourself by accident. This is just something that it's hard to have the bandwidth to think about. And if you don't have the expertise, you're not going to even know to look there until after somebody else is coming at your project going, hey, wait a second, you're using this thing that I did, or so on and so forth, right? The tough part, I think, is that most people don't come with the expertise, and the expertise is kind of expensive.
But not as expensive as trying to deal with it after the fact.
Right. And I think that what we would end up with if more people had that awareness is probably fewer startups.
So it's kind of a cost of innovation, like hindsight's 2020, and a cost of the speed of innovation.
I think the thing is the venture capitalists are aware of this, right? Like they know that this is going to be a problem for people. But they don't want to discourage them, because their approach to investing is to put a lot of money in a lot of places and expect to lose most of it. Right. So
I guess my question, my question to both of you is, like, we're talking a lot about the problems, we're seeing the problems. Do either of you see a solution to this in the future? Is there a solution here?
Well, I guess it depends on how this whole thing plays out, right? There's a road in front of us right now that involves either sort of a reconciliation with a system that is guided and protected by some of the legal precedents and approaches we've had in the past, and then there's another system altogether that may be parallel, that may just choose to go the Pirate Bay route and say, come at me, if you can, with what's left of your old system. And I think there's sort of a competing ethos in some of the different sectors of development on blockchains. So you'll have your more cypherpunk mindset that's like, let's build our systems such that if somebody wanted to come shut us down or try to send a right to sue letter or anything, like a demand letter to take things down, I won't have control over it, so that you can't actually instruct me to do that. So you may be able to come after me, but you won't be able to stop the thing. And I think that's some of the mindset. And then there's the other side of it that obviously wants to, not suicide mission their vision. So, but I do think there's a certain amount of suicide missioning your vision going on that can't be ignored.
Well, the problem with suicide is you die. So
right. Well, I mean, we're not doing it, but but a lot of people are okay with that.
Yeah.
If you can get something up and running on a public blockchain, and all you do is pass the torch on to a group that can't be very easily ordered to stop, then in a way you've kind of circumvented a lot of the traditional protections around IP.
Well, I don't think that the thing actually exists at scale. But before we get to that, I just want to answer Lisa's question. The question is phrased like there's a problem, how do we solve it? And I don't really think it's a problem, or it's not a problem that doesn't exist for every other industry and every other startup. So if I would call something a problem, the problem would be the lack of common business due diligence and prudence in the startups. When you start a project, unless this project is truly a hobby, you're starting a business. And if you're starting a business, there's certain things you need to do. A lot of times you incorporate to protect yourself from liability. You get a business number, email address. You make yourself known. You hire employees. These, basic steps. Intellectual property protection and knowledge of intellectual property is one of these steps. If you skip that, you could still start the business. The business may generate revenue, may generate a lot of revenue, but you left a pretty big hole, and that hole may come back to bite you. So the problem is not so much that, intellectual property exists and laws exist around it, is that those who are starting a business or invest in a business may not be taking it seriously until it's too late. And if you take intellectual property out and swap it with something else, such as human resource issues, criminal law, a variety of things, you still could have those problems if you ignore, the prudent steps of starting, developing, and building a business. Now, as for the cypherpunk, come after me, catch me if you can perspective, that can work. I've seen it work. But whenever you get to scale, it doesn't work because you have to interface with the rest of the economy. And that's not how the rest of the economy works.
Oh. What about Ethereum and Bitcoin, though? They both kind of did that.
No,
right? Like if they were shut downable, they would not have been welcomed products.
Well, Bitcoin is shut downable, but who's going to shut Bitcoin down and why?
Right. Well, they would have to disrupt a significant chunk of society and be really overtly aggressive with police power in order to do it.
They can make Bitcoin, put a very large tax levy on Bitcoin. That slows it down. But think about it. What is the incentive for those who have the power to shut it down and shut it down? Do you really think, that was a rhetorical question, but I'll answer, but I just want to pose a hypothetical. Do you really think that the FBI or the CIA would have both the intellectual chops, the resources, and the creativity to create something like Bitcoin on their own?
Oh, certainly not. Those sorts of, and I guess that's kind of my point is, we can throw rocks at people's due diligence, right, and the processes they undergo, but there's not support for that built into the way that startups come about. If you start talking about people making rational decisions about how they start their businesses and invest their capital, then what you have is a bunch of people who do an analysis and then don't do a business deal or don't do any kind of startup because they can't afford to do the initial cost of protecting the IP. Like, do you want these companies to exist at all? Is the threshold question, because if they did that analysis properly, they'd decide they didn't have it. They would spend more time saving. They would try to seek more investment. Things wouldn't happen because people wouldn't be able to just jump in and go. I think that's kind of a like the permissionless innovation element is hindered by proper due diligence when it comes to a lot of the teams that end up starting these projects.
Well, I disagree because I sort of Veritaseum almost no capital. It costs us $75 to file the
right. but you had some pre-existing expertise coming into it, right? You knew some of the things that you were supposed to do right. Just as we did with Rivet. Like, we didn't start our business like people traditionally start startups. It's one of the reasons why we're still here since from 2008 forward, or 18 forward. But that's not something that I think you can reasonably expect of everybody who starts a startup in the space. Some of the most amazing things we've seen have come from people who just like saw an idea on Twitter and decided to code it, and they put it up in a couple weeks. Right. And if you had imposed due diligence on that setup process, right? Assuming the motivation continued to exist to have it going, which may have been lost, the cost would have been prohibitive. Most of these people don't have money to drop on an appropriate due diligence research on IP.
But I understand the point, but I think you're putting the cart before the horse. So let's say you have a 16-year-old outstanding coder, never went to computer science school, but regardless, he excels in terms of execution of computer code. Doesn't know anything about IP, doesn't claim anything, and then he starts, getting very popular. And then investors come and they put money into it. That's the due diligence portion.
Right.
Right. The investors are the ones who are failing in due diligence because they're throwing money blindly. And they don't do this normally. This is the only industry I know where this much capital came in and nobody even asked the question of the people who are writing the technology on it. The only industry I could think of.
I don't know. I mean, we prepared for it for our own investment fundraising. I guess I didn't see that. I saw limits where people didn't go as far as you might normally do. If you had a sufficient capital backing it and no urgent market need to pay the bills while you were building the business at the same time, right? Like to a certain degree, I had try their best within the realm of within the bounds of a system that is not friendly to people who don't come to the table with existing capital.
I'm not going to do it now, but I can name quite a few projects with ample VC backing.
Right.
Who, are really sitting targets for the guys who own the IP that they're building on.
Right. I'm certain you're correct. I'm certain you're correct. I don't know if I'm not I guess trying to challenge the notion that these protections might be helpful to these businesses or that these startups are going to face trouble because of it. But I do think that the venture capital model is designed to account for that, and that a lot of the money moving that I see, that the bets that people place, sort of take into account that risk blithely, as opposed to or willingly, I guess, as opposed to ignorantly.
But I don't think we're disagreeing, except for
no, I agree.
except for that portion, because the same venture capitalists with the same money going into a different industry, they check. Can you think of? Let's name the biggest venture capitalist you could think of.
Tim Draper. Let's go with Tim Draper.
Do you think Tim Draper would invest in AMD spinoff without checking AMD's spinoff's patents?
Well, yeah. I mean, there's that, but keep in mind, software is in a weird space, right? With IP, it's not the same thing as your traditional, your traditional asset. You build a chip manufacture process that involves a certain amount of, encumberable engineering IP, right? Like you can actually, once you have an intellectual property right defined, get a lien against it and actually finance a bit by the process that you're even holding the machinery, for instance, that's capable of running a process to build a chip. It's not something you can do with a pure software thing, right? They don't. Nobody lends against an open source code base.
Well, no, but you're not lending against the open source code base. You're lending against the intellectual property that
right.
the open code base is built upon. So it's the IP, it's the property that be lent against.
Right. I'm just suggesting that collateralization is something that people take into account when they're deciding whether or not to lend credit in the provision of the service. Right. So you're going to, as a software project, not going to be able to walk in and say, and we'll have this amazing machine that you can stick your name on and have a lien on our proceeds from,
right. The lien doesn't come from the software, it comes from the property.
Right. I know. Right. I'm aware of this, but it's just, physical assets tend to be favored by people who can place liens.
Yeah. Well, like I said, we'll agree to disagree on that one.
Okay.
And most of the patents that are probably in the blockchain space probably aren't software patents anyway.
Right. They're not.
there are things other than software. But that's really irrelevant because if the patent's granted and is valid, property is property. And that's what the point is. And not to get in the weeds, which is starting to go into, but to take a step back, all I'm saying is just take a look. You cross the street, you should look before you step in. It's a lot safer that way. You know?
Well, I mean, it's true, but I coming from the standpoint of somebody who picked this up and just started up a company in the space, I can tell you that a lot of people are in fact wide-eyed looking, waiting for that shoe to drop and just can't afford to work within the system as it's designed because it's not designed to protect new players. And if you're coming undercapitalized, if you're bootstrapping a startup, one of the last things that you can afford to do is hire a patent attorney. I'm sorry, that's just the truth of the matter.
But when the investors come in, and I understand that, but once you get your first $10 million or $5 million, you get your first $150,000. $1,000 goes to a patent attorney.
Right. Well, I mean, but by that time you've imported 50. If you haven't thought about it, you've imported 15 different open source licenses into your code that conflict with each other. Right. So it's a really big bill.
Right. But the thing about it, the patent level is the open source licenses and what's mostly patented in the blockchain space that I've seen, aren't corollary. If you look at the significant patents that have been granted, very little to do with the actual software code.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the challenge here. It's like the people that are building it are thinking about it in terms of what they're building, not what the overall sort of construct of processes they can create look like. Like it's an uncommon way of thinking, and people aren't going to intuitively go there. So that's another part of the problem, right? Another part of the challenge.
Well, uncommon for open source developers, okay, but not. So that's why you can't know. So once you get going. Once you get your first check-in, bring the experts in and let them do their job. Now, when the experts don't do their job, that's my gripe. Then we have an issue. And why aren't the experts doing their job here when they do it everywhere else?
That's a great point. And I think you guys have debated this very well. I just wanted to interject as I think it comes down to you don't know what you don't know. And I've worked with startups in the past, and I know that the good ones, they do have attorneys on staff, but a lot of them don't. And I think a lot of these projects are innovative, and they're just coders that are just coding, as Greg pointed out, and they don't know what they don't know. But I think that, Reggie, and I think you would say this as well, I think that the Veritaseum patents have been started to be cited quite a lot. I think you have a number of citations of Veritaseum's patent. Is that the right mechanism? What should be the process going forward? This is also an education, not just for crypto, for all open source projects. Should the VCs be bringing this to their attention? Should the people, is there, again, they don't know what they don't know. What is the right recipe going forward?
Well, it is to learn and not know everything. I think the biggest mistakes occur when you try to become a professional in something you're not a professional at. It's very easy to make a mistake. Think about a very strong patent attorney trying to write software. It's not the most efficient way to get software written. So, again, when you get your first funding, round in, hire the professionals and take a look. Day before yesterday, or was it yesterday? I'm a little tired. Day before yesterday, possibly, I spoke to one of the largest VCs in the country. Okay, I'm not going to go through the name because it's absolutely relevant. Very well known, right? Hands in a lot of space, particularly in the blockchain DLT space. And I don't know if you recognize me or not. I can't tell anymore. But I introduced myself. We were discussing. I told him what we were up to. And I'm going to condense this to a short, synopsis. He basically said he didn't believe in software patents. He didn't think software patents existed. Again, this is, I wasn't really discussing a software patent, but I think that's relevant because I understand his perspective and he's free to have it. But whether you believe in it or not, the USPTO believes in it. And
well, it's a thought terminating argument, right? Like it says, I am done discussing the question of intellectual property protection, and I'm siding on the side of an absolute. We're going to cut it off in front of what I consider to be an appropriate place to start calling the gray area black. And that's it. I'm just going to stay over here. You can stay on your side of the line, and we'll agree to disagree. But I think that's an unfortunate problem because discussing the details of how the system works. And how the system serves the people that it serves and how we can change it to protect interests, but also better serve the people who are trying to create things permissionlessly, who might not know. How can this system be set up so that it's less of a rug pull when people finally find out what is going on? Like, how can it be possible that we have a system that that's built on open source code that promotes this ideal of create and publish and then share, and build your value on top of that, right? Like, and then also have this system that sort of sneaks in and clubs you over the head after you have some success with it. To a certain degree, it seems like poor UX on the IP system is a big part of the problem.
But it also doesn't necessarily sneak in. I mean,
because we'd like to avoid conflict about it, right? Like, that should be the ideal, is that people can create and the IP doesn't get in the way.
But you can't avoid conflict if you refuse to discuss it.
Right? Exactly. And that's why I think it's unfortunate that it gets cut off.
Yeah, I'm the IP holder. I went to discuss it, and he says, I don't believe in software patents. I wasn't even discussing software patents.
Well, if you don't believe in it, they can still believe in you, right?
Well, that's the point. So, whether you believe it or not is absolutely irrelevant. The patent is issued, the law backs it, and, the courts believe in it. And that's an unnecessary way of going about things when you have somebody who's trying to have an open discussion. I'm thinking, hey, you could do a blanket license of the patent, and then all your portfolio companies actually escape liability. And I have a whole bunch of ideas and spin-off ideas and additional patent filings. Take them, right? I can't execute on all of them. It's just too many. But
right.
Your portfolio companies could take them and run. So
I'm just very curious what you think about, like, how we could make it so that so that the system really serves people automatically, so that there isn't this built-in trapdoor. Like, what would you change about the way the law works in order to make sure that that a kid starting up in his garage gets some basic default protection that makes sense, even if he doesn't file anything first, or do any research first, if it makes sense? Like, how would you do that in a world that's augmented by a technology that is in fact capable of keeping really good records in time? Because that's what blockchain presents.
Tell me, you said there's a built-in trapdoor, so I don't know if I disagree or agree with it.
Well, it's more like people who don't know what they know finding out what they know. That's always going to happen.
Right.
Or finding out what they don't know. And finding out what they don't know from a cease and desist letter is a lot different from finding out what you don't know from your attorney that you hired sort of smartly up front, because you had the time and the cash and the know-how to know that you needed to check.
Well, there's some education, because there's a lot of entities who have a lot of money and their attorneys warn them. And then there's the fact that knowledge reigns supreme. So let's take it out of the legal realm. And I'm not a lawyer, by the way. So
I'm not anymore either. So
I'm not a lawyer.
Sorry, if I start to sound like I'm cross-examining you, it's because I can't break all of the old habits. I'm trying to quit being a lawyer, but it's hard.
I get cross-examined all the time. So I'm actually good at it. But let's take it from a purely development perspective, using Solidity, which is a low-level language.
Mm-hmm.
You build a system, you build a bunch of smart contracts. There's a bunch of bugs, holes. There's a bunch of race conditions built all into your contract. Okay, you release it without getting it audited, or 2 audits where you should, and then someone manipulates it. They don't even hack it, because the term hack in the manipulation of smart contracts, in my opinion, is a total.
It's a misnomer. You're right. It's an exploit that somebody left open.
It's just that simple.
Right.
You
more like a social engineering vector than anything.
Someone took advantage of it. He learns because he did not do proper due diligence. Okay, you could have had that audited. If he didn't have the money, no problem. He could have had other peers look into it, but he chose not to. Someone took advantage of it. The same thing on the IP space. If you don't do a good job, if you're not careful, then there's a very good chance it's going to come back and bite you in your arse.
Right. No, you're absolutely right. I just think the calculated risk is something that is more of a passive game of Russian roulette that every vendor has to play because of the nature of the system, right? Like, if we had a system that was designed to more facilitate these protections becoming a part of the way people think about it, that taught people about it early. Like, there could be a course in high school on this, for Christ's sakes, and you'd be doing better than
You know,
like.
if I'm not mistaken, I think I said this one of the previous shows. Um, a lot of people say I don't understand intellectual property and patents, and most people don't. It's the esoteric branch of esoteric profession, which is law. But how is it you are an aspiring entrepreneur? You don't understand how to file and execute a patent, but you understand trigonometry. When was the last time you used trigonometry personally?
Well, I just feel like people know what they know, and there's going to be some that do come to the table and know it, and they're going to be the ones that survive easily, right?
You should
And
actually
then they're the ones that are potentially great that get destroyed by the fact that they didn't know what they were going to do.
right, but to the point you made, this should be part of basic matriculation in high school.
It should be. I would 100% support that.
If you're taught, relatively esoteric math concepts that practically nobody besides an architect or an engineer would use post 12th grade, but you don't know how to protect your own intellectual property, well, then maybe the courseware needs to be updated significantly.
Right. At the very least, we can give people a high level understanding. I mean, we all know that that Congress doesn't operate by the model that's taught in Schoolhouse Rock, but at least they tried to make a Schoolhouse Rock video. Why don't they have a Schoolhouse Rock for freaking for intellectual property? They should. At least then people wouldn't come into it completely blindsided if they come from a background that that doesn't place the concerns in front of them or doesn't give them the wherewithal to ask that kind of question because it's just outside of their umwelt.
I wanted to ask you, Reggie, we were looking over the report and there's so much great information. What do you think the most important thing was that you learned or when Veritaseum was doing this analysis on block? What was the most important or what was the thing that stood out the most for you in this report?
How important intellectual property is to block and how they got started. Block got started with an inventor, an entrepreneur, who created a little square device that allowed you to swipe credit cards, which is why they call it Square. And he was excluded from the company, apparently, according to our research. Now, not a legal disclaimer, just a common sense disclaimer. I wasn't there, so I don't know what happened.
Right.
So we know what was reported. Okay. So he was excluded from the company, but he did file a patent for the technology. And the members of the executive team of Block, the founding members, were on the patent. And so there was a dispute, and eventually settled. They got added to the patent. He got paid $50 million after XYZ years. But that is an interesting and rocky start. And again, another one of many anecdotal data points that show why you should take intellectual property seriously. Block has had a few intellectual property disputes since then. One is a trademark. Block purchased a tax analysis, a tax preparation software startup, and they renamed themselves Block. Now you can see where that might have an issue because there's this very renowned company called H&R Block, which specializes in tax preparation software. So I think as time goes on in this industry, you're going to have a lot of IP challenges. You're going to have a lot of patent challenges on the execution space and the property space. But in the NFT space, you can see the brand holders are getting very, very aggressive in protecting their IP. Very aggressive. The luxury brands and Nike, etc. And for good reason. It doesn't take that much money to build a pair of Nike sneakers. Okay, most of the capital goes into marketing. Okay, same, and even more so with the luxury brands such as Hermes, etc. How much does it cost for those bags to be made, particularly if you make them offshore? So if you had like a bar graph, the largest stat would be marketing and promotion. So they put all that money into marketing, and then someone capitalizes on that marketing by minting an NFT very quickly within minutes and selling it. You're going to have significant challenges. So
this is kind of because the industry is so new, we're kind of in this growing pains period, or this growth spurt, I guess, kind of the teen years for cryptocurrency as far as patents and IP.
Right. It's
people really seeing the value of the value of IP and understanding it.
Now the industry is new, but the problem is not. Take crypto out of it and go to any major city, especially in the East Coast, and go to the corners and you see guys selling knockoff bags.
Right.
You know, so,
But the point that they become, this is interesting, the point that they become a criminal act of, or they become criminal actors is not really the moment that they create a lookalike product either. It can even be a very high quality lookalike, and they have not committed a crime until they put a counterfeit tag on it, right? It's that moment of tag attachment, like the thing that costs them money on the black market in order to sell those things is the purchasing of the counterfeit tags and the counterfeit tracking.
yeah.
And that's that to me is
calling it the thing. The moment they call it the thing is
the moment is
the
it is
moment,
presented
so.
as an original of something that they didn't create. It depends on what kind of industry. If you're talking about a fashion product, right, you're talking about the moment that you hook the Hermes tag onto the fake Hermes bag.
So, Greg, where would you draw the line for software and open source code?
Well, it's a difficult challenge, right? Like,
yeah.
I think this is a challenge that I don't know how familiar you guys are with Lawrence Lessig's work around this. He wrote Code V2 around the turn of the century, right around the middle of the dot-com boom, or the early part of the dot-com boom. And it was sort of a retake on his idea that code could be a form of regulation that would be liberatory. And in reality, what he came up with was an answer in Code V2 that looked a lot more like code would appear to be liberatory at first, and then thanks to some of the systems it would clash with, would end up facilitating a closing of things. And its interaction with intellectual property was one of those concerns that he had. To me, the challenge is going to be twofold. Right? You're going to have some need for systemic change that will fit with a new status quo of markets if the people behind crypto are really selling the thing that they're selling, right? I believe they are. If we're trying to disrupt the way that things get done at a fundamental foundational level and bring in this new technology, not to just replace inefficiencies, but to replace inefficiencies in a way that makes humanity a more flourishing species, right? Like that kind of stuff is normative. It's more ethical, and there are some people who are ethically opposed to the way things are currently run in terms of some of the advantages they give to people who started first with something. And I think that you're going to see a lot of resistance to conforming to traditional intellectual property that may be facilitated by the immutable nature of public blockchains. But to a certain degree, you're also going to see some people who want to play nice with the existing players because they want to be part of it. They want to be part of the story of brands like Gucci and Armani. They want to be able to put those on the blockchain and have them have a story there, and that's going to involve some more traditional processes. So it's just going to be a big conversation, and there's going to be a lot of new paths taken that end up being dead ends that hurt people, like that hurt their businesses and their ideas and dreams pretty fast. And one of them is going to be clashes with this old system. I think that it's going to require collaborative redesign of the way that we regulate this before we can actually get it to cohere.
Yeah, I think it's kind of uncharted waters a bit because this industry. This is focusing on crypto for a moment. Like you're looking at basically an industry that's like it really started in 2014. A lot of the expansion was 2014. So you're less than 10 years old, and now you've got legacy regulatory systems that are going to be and trying to legislate things based on pre-existing laws. And none of us are attorneys, so we just think we should put the disclaimer out there. None of us are practicing attorneys, which is just all of our opinions. But you got one of the benefits and also the negatives is the blockchain is immutable. I mean, you're going to be able to have traceability of this open source code to where it all came back from. And if that origin infringes on something, well, then everything downstream infringes. So it's going to be a very interesting regulation discussion. And that's part of the reason we wanted to facilitate this roundtable today. Oh, yeah. Well, and I think the challenge is you can't force a smart contract to adhere to a cease and desist letter. And that's going to be the biggest clash. Yes. Enforceability is going to be a challenge. Go ahead, Reggie.
But I have a solution. But before I get to the solution, let me challenge it. So is the blockchain really, really immutable?
Well, I mean, is the blockchain really immutable is a question of, again, normative values. How willing are we to send men with guns to make it not immutable?
You don't need to send men with guns.
In some cases, you probably would.
The guy who took money out of the DAO and did not steal it, he read the contract, right?
Right.
He read a loop, took advantage of it. That blockchain was not immutable. It was rewritten. like that.
Right. Well, yeah, it was rewritten by consensus, though. It was everybody decided, and that was a pretty big controversy.
Everybody didn't decide. I didn't.
Well, I mean, if you were involved as a voting hashing power on Ethereum at the time, you did.
No, if you take a look, if you go back and take a look at the numbers, a very, very small minority voted.
Right. A very small minority was running most of the network at the time.
Everybody wasn't close to half, was even close to a third. It wasn't even close to a quarter.
Yeah.
So, and I'm not knocking them.
I was saying forcing a rewrite of history would be a lot harder in 2022 than it was back then.
It was a blockchain back then. It's not immutable. That's the cold water fact.
Well, and technically, yes, it was still immutable. They iterated to a new block where they forked. The old block didn't change, right?
Okay.
Like technically, ETC is still a blockchain and people use it. Like, and it didn't change any of that. So
the use of ETC is maybe 1%, 2%, 3%. If even that, I doubt if it's even that much of Ethereum itself. And it just throw cold water on it. I don't want to get into the weeds on that, but the solution for IP infringement, whether it's trademark, copyright, patent, is to have a database, right? And have an oracle hit the database and enforce this at the protocol level. It's cheaper. As a patent holder myself, I would much rather license at a significant discount an entire chain, such as Ethereum, where a portion of the gas pays for the use of the protected code. Number one, I don't have to worry about auditing, chasing people down, jumping lawsuits. It's part of the transaction mechanism itself. And it's much safer and much less liability.
But doesn't it miss opportunities, though, to capitalize on IP to really reward the original creators and encourage people to innovate on top of that? Like, I feel like there's a deeper collaboration with it that could actually be positive sum, right? Like, IP should be a tool that encourages innovation at its best, right?
What prevents someone from doing that? Just because
nobody.
Additional 35 guai on top of every transaction, right? Mm-hmm. You wouldn't even feel it unless you really be heavy into the industry, number one.
Right. I think it's probably going to be project by project as opposed to chain wide. That's going to be an easier thing to get.
Iterate and invent on top of it. Just go ahead and do it.
Yep.
It's same thing on the NFT trademark. But I think the industry should solve this problem before Congress gets around to doing it, because they're going to do it. You're going to do it with a blunt instrument, and you're not going to like it.
the way that they do it, they'll probably
solve
do something completely non sequitur and not solve the problem at all.
If you steal somebody's property, I don't care how libertarian you want to be or cyberpunk. If I stole your private key is, especially it's a mnemonic key you came up with, right? It's yours. You made it. It's actually intellectual property. If I took it, you're going to have a problem with it. Okay. A lot of people who are anti-IP protection are usually anti-IP protection when it's somebody else's IP. When it's their IP, they understand completely.
Right. And I don't think anybody's arguing that anti-IP is a rational approach. Like that is a dead end of argument. That's where we start fighting as opposed to start talking.
The solution is you can have a database of trademarks. Hermes, Louis Vuitton, Boulevard, whatever. Okay. And then if you mint an NFT and you attempt to sell it or market it, right, and it pings against one of these trademarks, okay, it should be blocked for review, right? But you can't simply say, here's a Hermes bag and then put it on OpenSea. That should be blocked at the protocol level. And you can have a review for your panel through the legal system.
But who's going to impose that control is my question.
Excuse me?
Who's going to impose that control is an important question.
Who imposes the control all the other checks and balances to the blockchain? You could use validators. You could do the staking system.
Right. But I mean, like, validators are necessarily a sort of stochastic process running on a bunch of human beings, right? Like, you've got miners individually deciding whether or not they're going to adopt changes to the protocol. Right.
And there's a reason why that protocol can't be hit or miss, 1 or 0 on a trademark.
Right. So you would have to get consensus-wide adoption, which is something that would be very difficult to do, I think, without employing force.
Well, it's not. You are applying force with the block. When you validate a block, you're applying force.
Right. But I mean, like, you know what I mean, right? Like, how would you get every single validator to adopt it? How would you convince them?
I think let me phrase it a different way, if I could, Reggie, just to add to Greg's point, is like the validators are within that ecosystem. So I think the point is that if you're trying to go beyond, just pick a project. Just we'll pick Bitcoin. So Bitcoin, like the validators of Bitcoin, or the miners that would validate for Bitcoin, that ecosystem is contained within Bitcoin. That has nothing to do with what Ethereum or any other chain does. So I think Greg's point is that if you're going to have a trademark, a repository that they need to all validate against, everybody's got to do it. And then as soon as somebody doesn't, now you're like, okay, well, or somebody's got a different repository. How do we enforce that? So it gets to be,
So to that question, okay,
yeah.
Here's the question: you fork Ethereum or fork something that you think works. I'm not gonna pick, but if you use, for the sake of argument, you fork Ethereum, okay, and you just add the trademark validation code to it.
Right.
Now you say if you want to do an NFT, right, and you want credibility, you want liability protection against trademark infringement, this is the chain of launch on.
Right.
So
what if people refuse to join that fork though?
To launch on if you don't want Reggie Middleton coming to sue you or everybody else.
Right. And you know, I think the key is you're going to see some people say, okay, how can we structure this so that we're least exposed to this, and that all the exposure would go to the part that we've automated with the smart contract. You know, have fun in trying to place an in-rem argument against a smart contract, because it's going to be a difficult turnip to get blood from in terms of a court order.
But this is to prevent the court order. You know, the ideology that you can just thumb your nose up to the entire legal system, and
right. I'm not saying that that's a good ideology. I'm just saying that it exists.
Nasty run-ins with the establishment where I was right. Well, I'm not going to get into it. Where I felt I didn't do anything wrong, and strongly felt. But the system is what it is, and most of the people who want to skirt the system only want to skirt parts of the system. When the system gets them, they're all for it. When your house catches on fire, you want to be able to call 911 and fire trucks appear.
Right, but there's a coordination problem getting people in the aggregate to agree to a single system of enforcement in this world. Like it's just difficult to do.
Those are market forces. If I create NFT chain, which is basically Ethereum, right, solving the gas problem, proof of stake, right, and having this NFT, having the trademark checks and balances through the validation system, and it pings off of an oracle. Okay, I say, and I market it. If you want an NFT that doesn't have legal liabilities built into the system, this is the one to go. Either it succeeds or it fails. If it succeeds, the market pushes users onto the system. And I can easily see where all the big record companies, all the big luxury labels, all the big artists, everybody who benefits from owning their own brand would flood into that system, and the market causes it to flourish.
Right. That is true. That could happen, right? If you had sort of an iTunes-like effect where somebody does it really smart and makes it completely pointless to bother with the trouble of decentralized file stores like Kazaa, when you can just download it on iTunes for a really reasonable price, right? But it does leave some holes, right? Like there are limitations when it comes to creatives still. Like you can't download from iTunes and expect to get with that a license to back your video with it. Those are fun. Those are common sense changes that I think that we can look at in terms of, of IP law that would make people more enthusiastic about approaching it from a single standpoint, right? Like if it were more about enabling people first as opposed to reserving rights first, I think you would have a lot better of a time trying to convince everybody to adopt your chain where IP can be enforced from top down. Right, like I don't think a lot of people are going to adopt that fork otherwise.
Yeah, well, the iTunes analogy, I don't think it's a very good fit, because it's not. iTunes is a server that.
Well, I mean, but iTunes popularized music, right, in a way that, or downloadable music in a way that made it easier to comply with the law than to download it from Kazaa or Shazam or whatever. Like going to one of these decentralized illegal download sites, it was just easier to download it from iTunes for $1. Right.
There's absolutely no reason why you can't make the decentralized site legal as well, which is what I'm explaining with the blockchain. what it does is it's like in YouTube. Okay, if you put in the Rolling Stones' most famous song in YouTube as your background music, YouTube flags it and says you've used copyrighted material.
Right.
Okay, they used to block it, but now they let it go through and they just give whatever ad revenue to the copyright holder.
Right. How is that not something that we can do systemically and approve of it? Like, how come we have to have a gatekeep when we could have a storefront? I guess like you should be able to purchase IP when it comes up, and the system should be able to help you identify it.
Right. But the gatekeep is something that is wanted and needed, particularly by
well, I mean, wanted and needed by people who traditionally are protected by gates, right? Not necessarily wanted and needed by people who have trouble even finding where to talk about what's behind the gate, let alone have a chance to purchase its value.
Here's a fundamental disagreement. They're wanted and needed by the people who own the yard. Okay, so you have a yard. You put a gate around it. It's your yard. You're free to do it. Now the people who walk through the yard and get in for free don't want the gate down. Okay, that's because
that's not the internet. That's yards. Like the internet is a global place you walk around and see stuff, right? Like it kind of hampers its functionality in a way that wasn't intended by original IP.
If you believe in a constitution, you believe in property rights. When you create something, it's yours. Okay, and it's yours to either give away.
That is correct.
Or to neither. So, if you facilitate someone stealing, right, then you're going to have a conflict. So
stealing by hosting a movie show in the 1990s by buying a cassette tape and then charging theater admission at your home theater is a lot different from having a streaming channel because it's so inherent to the way the internet works to share. Like it just cuts off. It has a practical effect of cutting regular people off from the ability to use cultural artifacts that are expensive intellectually.
No, I disagree. Listen. If it's yours, it's yours.
Okay, well, how do you then, as this show, go out and get a Billie Eilish song to be the title track for the intro?
I'll get a who song?
A Billie Eilish song. If we want to go get like a really popular song, like
my
number one charts, how would we afford that? How would we afford that, right? Like, how would we even go about it?
If Billie Eilish owns this song, it's their song.
Well, I mean, Billie Eilish and her recording contracts and her publishers.
How do you go and get Billie Eilish's song?
Right. Have you been to the IP site before? Like, have you tried to buy it? They don't respond to your emails if you're not somebody.
Hold on. Just let me get this out so you can respond. If Billie Eilish owns a song, it's their song. They have complete control over it because it's theirs.
Correct.
You're in let's suppose you're in a house. It's your house.
I'm not confused about the basic structure of it. I'm just I'm trying to understand how we can get to a place where in order to freely exchange and engage in collaborative creation, to engage in sort of the derivative works aspect of it that really the internet is all about getting. How do we do that in a way that doesn't add so much friction that we lose a lot of creativity?
Yeah, but I don't believe the internet is about getting a derivative work.
Well, okay, I think that might be our fundamental disagreement then, because I kind of do.
If the derivative work still belongs to Billie Eilish, it's theirs. Without the constitutional right to own.
I agree.
Everything falls apart in capitalism.
I agree, but I think the not putting things on the market is a lot of the problem. I think people restrict things from the market in IP quite intentionally because they don't want others to be able to use them. I think that's a market advantage that has a net negative for creativity. Okay,
here, you're in your house. You bought your house. You have the deed to it. You restrict me from throwing a party in your house tonight.
Yeah, that's not the same thing. We're not talking about throwing a party in my house. We're talking about using intellectual property in a public display. It's
no matter how you use it, property is owned by the property owner. Okay, you cannot tell the property owner.
Okay, well, let's use a different example then. What if I want to set up a screen at the end of my driveway and play a political advocacy concept that I came up with, and then backtrack that to a song by Eminem? How do I get that intellectual property right as that individual?
You ask Eminem to use the song.
Okay, so Eminem, how do I get a hold of him? How do I get a hold of him?
That's like if you have a house and I want to back up and use your house, I ask you. If I can't get a hold of you, that is my problem. It's your house where I get a hold of you.
So if you want to say make sure nobody but me can get the gravitas of Eminem songs, then you can buy the IP and refuse to negotiate.
That is true. If I bought your house,
that is an ugly truth that runs most of the internet.
Listen, if I bought your house from you.
They don't want to sell it to you, man. They don't want to sell you the song. They don't want to sell you the right.
You're exercising control of your property by saying, I don't want to sell it to you.
Right.
That's
But what if you are actually missing out on a marketplace by not even being given the opportunity to buy it as an artist? What if, for instance, like Trent Reznor wants to sell it, and so he has to do something like, break his contract with his old label and start his own in order to freely offer his IP, which he actually did. And you can get derivative works rights to Trent Reznor stuff by just pulling it down because he's pre-granted it. The system is like, we're not talking about the quiet part here. The system is designed to restrict IP from people who are trying to make it into a space. It is a form of competitive box out,
Okay.
And I think that's the thing that's the fundamental disagreement with the blockchain space is like, people are going to resist that. People are not going to go along with keeping the system in such a way that people who already have power can maintain the status quo easily.
So if you're a property owner,
it's a negotiation.
If you're a property owner and you feel that way, then you create a system where you can give the property out in the fashion that you wish.
Right.
I'm not disagreeing on how the system will favor those with power. I'm disagreeing on about your proclivity to tell a property owner what they can or cannot do.
Right. No, I'm not trying to tell a property owner what they can and can't do. I'm just trying to make sure that that when we talk about this, we talk about the quiet part too, right? Because yes, we can stand here and talk about the intellectual property law being something that people don't understand how to respect and don't understand how to follow. But there's not a whole lot of incentive for them to play in a lot of cases because that market isn't open to them. A lot of times that market is meant to be a slammed door in the face to begin with, right?
I don't disagree with that. Listen, I think it's $75 to file a provisional patent. It is a very low bar, and it's a low bar for a reason, to allow almost any entrepreneur who has access to $75. I think it's 75, I can't remember, but it's very low. It's definitely less than a few hundred.
Then hourly rates, right?
No, it's not hourly. You could actually file a provisional patent by hand, okay? But like everything else where expertise is involved, the more you know, the better you do. You take writing computer code. You could write computer code by hand, and Solidity is basically just JavaScript, recast. You can figure it out almost by reading as human language.
Right. But, so you accidentally invoke something that somebody else has patented. How do you find that out?
By looking. Right.
By looking how?
You go to the USPTO site and you do a prior art search. You could go to Google and do a prior art search. Now, that's not the best way to do it, but you can do it.
Right. And that's what people who probably know about the problem but don't have the ability to afford a patent attorney do, in fact, right? If they check that.
And I'm not advocating, actually, you should do it. My issue is after you get your first investment, that's when you hire the experts to fill in the holes. Of course, you probably can't do it on your own. But once you get your first $5 million check, if you can't cut $10,000 or $20,000 to make sure your business is yours before you start building on it, you failed in your due diligence.
Right. No, I agree with you there. I'm just saying, like, that the moral implications of that and the likelihood that excludes a lot of entrepreneurs is something that we can't ignore when we talk about the low-level concept. It has to be part of the conversation.
It doesn't exclude entrepreneurs who get that $5 million check. I could understand. Listen, I have money issues like everybody else. I've been very, very poor. So I do understand, okay? But once you're funded, you cannot use access to capital as an excuse once you're funded. Or once your company's making enough revenue where you can self-fund.
Right. Well, I mean, but what if you have an argument instead of an excuse? And what if it's a standpoint as opposed to a misunderstanding?
Well, then you explain it to the judge and the jury, which is where
or the lobbyists and the legislature, right? We can change things. Like the society is not immutable.
Lobbyists don't directly affect the legislative arm, so at least the courts. So you can lobby.
Wait. So you can't hire somebody on K Street to help get a bill passed?
Well, getting a bill passed is very different from winning in court. So there are two different paths.
I'm familiar. I'm trying to say that like there's more than a status quo argument here. We don't have to keep things the way they are. And let the chips fall where they may. Like it's not necessarily a matter of just following the law. It's a matter of interacting and engaging with it.
And I agree. Look, I'm the underdog, right? I'm the guy who was stripped clean by the SEC enforcement arm. I'm
Dude, I'm with you, man. And I'm having this discussion, by the way. I love this. This is so fun to talk to you because you're such a great
I'm enjoying it as well. So,
a great intellectual engager on this topic. Like it's fascinating. So
I'm the underdog. I am not.
I'll love when I'm saying stuff.
I'm not the guy that the Harvard Business School graduate who left the Goldman Sachs prop desk, raised $3 billion in deploying capital. That's not me. I'm the underdog. So I'm part of the racial, social, and socioeconomic minority. I am the guy who got stripped by the SEC enforcement arm, and I still managed to claim some intellectual property, and I'm attempting to create value out of it. So I'm actually the demographic that you're arguing for, I think.
Well, I'm arguing for all of us.
Right? But I am a very, very strong believer in constitutional rights.
Me too. Me too, actually. Actually, same.
Without the constitutional property rights, my invention would have been subsumed by somebody else a long time ago.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
The chant. Okay, but now I own it. I'm not invited to the clubhouse. I'm not a member of the club, but I own the deed to the clubhouse.
Yeah.
And so I can force my way to the table now. And that's because of intellectual property rights.
That is so true. And the point behind that is both, what that means to you and what it means to the people who created the IP originally, right? Like the person who conceives of an idea really ought to be protected. That's the right path, right? That is the right thing. And it's just where you run into situations like what happened to poor Nikola Tesla and the radio. Like first to file systems host him out of his rightful credit as the inventor of radio.
Well, gentlemen, I think this has been a very lively debate. I really appreciate this, and I think that it's not the right analogy of IP stands for intellectual property, but I think we're both debating two different I's and P's, which are implementation and process. But I think we can both agree that this should evolve and can evolve because that's what blockchain and DLT is all about. We're going to evolve, and this is one path I think we need to evolve in this direction. So I'm glad that we've had this lively debate, but I wanted to close with one more question, and it's a slightly different viewpoint. I'm just going to change the hat that I'm wearing and be a very token holder for a moment. And I just want to ask Reggie, these reports, and I'm assuming that there's going to be more, but these reports, how do they benefit? Can you explain for the average very token holder? What is the benefit to this report? How does this add value to the very token, or how do you connect those dots for the average very token holder? I'm sure that person would want to hear that as part of this discussion.
Okay, so I'm going to answer that in detail, but before I do, the benefits of the very token for the very token holder, in my opinion, was destroyed by the SEC enforcement arm when they confiscated 98% of very tokens. Discard all the capital from us, my personal capital, as well as capital, and all the other assets. So, any perceived lack of value or lack of generating additional value since then, I direct everybody to the SEC. Okay. Now, I did pledge to attempt to add value to the very token post that event, if I could do it practically without causing myself any legal, financial, or other harm. And that's a segue into answering your question. So I just want to get that out. That's my, disclaimer.
Take that.
The reports should be highly educational. They're educational to me, and they cost me a lot of money. If you look at the reports in terms of their depth, not just their length, their depth and breadth and accuracy of analysis, they're not done for $45, $50. So these are tens of thousands of dollars of worth of research per report. And as terms of accuracy, look at the original report and look at what we anticipated, and then look at what Block's earnings came out as just last week. Extremely accurate, like within pennies, and contrary to the entire street. So not only were we almost 100% accurate, almost 98% accurate, we were in direct contravention to what all the so-called smart guys said. I still stand behind my word when I say that I will accept Very tokens as a discount mechanism for licensing. And the Block report shows that there's a possibility of Block potentially infringing.
Yep. Reggie, I do have to say the report, by the way, I got to read through it in some detail before we talked today, and really great depth, really great perspective. A lot of it, things that I know because I'm part of the space. But like you said, it's a good primer for people who are getting in. So I just wanted to say, like, despite any philosophical debates we might have been perceived to be having here today that caused anyone to think we disagree, I think Reggie's got a smart perspective, and the reports that he's creating are of high value. So you should really check them out, even and especially if you take a point of view that leans more cypherpunk, because this is another perspective that has a lot of value and a lot of thought behind it. So I would just add that.
Thank you, Greg. I really appreciate that. And Reggie, can you tell us where everybody can find this report and where they can find other reports? I'm sure you'll be doing more reports like this.
Boombusblog.com. It's either on the front page, or if it got pushed off, just go to the search in the upper right-hand corner and type in block, and it should come up. There's more coming continuous. It's not just a report; it's an ongoing story with block. We have noticed block. I've made that public. It wasn't public before. We have noticed them, and block is based, according to the CEO and CFO, they're looking to base the company basically on Bitcoin going forward. Interesting. And, I have to give them credit. That's a bold move, but I have some significant issues with Bitcoin, at least BTC, but I'm bullish on the industry, and if executed properly, there's promise there. There's a lot of moving parts, so I'm not going to get into that, but interesting. Coinbase report is coming out. It's ready. The model is fully done, and the report is done. But there's a lot that needs to be added to it, because there are several patent families that have a lot to do with Coinbase's business, and I want that integrated. This is not just about Reggie Middleton and Veritaseum and the IP. There are multiple patent holders that have significant claims, in our opinion. And so we're building that into the model, and we're giving scenarios to educate people on the gross overvaluation of the companies that use this technology, because they have been collecting rents for properties that they don't own. And these rents are significant. So if you look at revenue growth, profit margins, and profit margin growth of exchanges, they're significant. Okay, but not all that is theirs, in my analytical opinion, and that of the team. So we're meticulously going through multiple scenarios with using real numbers and a legal understanding, but not from a lawyer. So it's not a legal opinion. It's just our understanding. And we're going to express that to everybody. After Coinbase, I'm not going to tell you who we're discussing next, but I am fully confident in saying that these reports are best in class. Go through every Wall Street bank. Nobody's even mentioning IP. And the biggest threat to revenues for Coinbase, in my opinion, is IP. And the way Block accounts for their revenues, which I don't agree with, but I'm assuming their accountants know what they're doing, got legal clearance. I don't agree with how Block is accounting for their revenues. They account Bitcoin, they account for Bitcoin sales as revenues, where they should, in my opinion,
interesting,
for the spread of Bitcoin costs versus Bitcoin revenues as revenues. So
that's pretty interesting, actually. That's an unusual take when you think about it.
I don't really see that fitting into gap, but I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt.
Well, and I did want to mention that we did invite Block to be present today for this panel. We put out a tweet and tagged them back on May 13th and did not hear back from them. So just wanted to make sure that we let everybody know that they were invited to be.
If they want to come back and do it again after hearing this, I'd come back again. I don't know about you, Reggie.
Yeah, I was about to say anytime.
Sure. Yeah.
When they come back, you do it through the VeriDAO, you do it directly.
We always welcome discussion.
And it's a professional conversation. You're not going to. This is not the Bitcoin maximalist. Your mother smokes dried butterfly. No.
Nope.
The conversation, respectful, and I'm open to hear their perspective. And if you don't want to do it, I can understand. But the more diverse the opinion, the better the conversation, I think.
Yep. Oh, absolutely. I mean, and they could add some valuable context to that report, frankly.
So, everything in that report is public information except for the notice by the board in public. So, we notice block that we feel that we have a conversation to have.
Well, thank you guys all for joining us. I think it was a great conversation, and you guys once again can go to Boom Blast blog and find the report for yourself, download it, and get educated. We'll be back with more great interviews here on the VeriDAO. Thanks for joining us.